this chapter was quite interesting in the things that it was able to set up for the eventual fight of Ryan versus Gilbert, as well as Yamashita's agreement with Shen Wulong. This is gonna be some very interesting stuff, and it seems as though Sandrovich is sort of laying down the framework for what might be happening in the future of the series, and he's been doing this for a while now, I think since chapter 250. But the chapter's name is labeled Forget It, and we'll see why it's actually called this later on. But it starts off by basically noting down that this conversation between Yamashita and Shen Wulong is happening around the same time that the fight between Ryan and the Westwood faction members William and Sean. And so while all of that is happening, Shen Wulong is basically explaining to Yamashita that the Hung Shrang technique was basically not good enough, at least to actually accomplish what Shen Wulong is setting out to do, and that is move his consciousness into a different body. That is specifically what he wants to do here. He doesn't want to pass on his memories to the next connector. That's not really his goal right now. It's actually having the Tiger connector in another body to fight. And so he actually came up with a few ideas to do this physically and directly. The first one was the cyber brain, and Shen Wulong actually ends up confirming that the cyber brain probably is not gonna happen, mainly because of the technological advancements of basically Shen Wulong's current time. The problem with the cyber brain, at least currently, is that that plan for Shen Wulong isn't really viable in his lifetime, meaning he will probably die before that plan becomes feasible. My guess is that he was going to upload his consciousness into that brain, or upload the tiger's consciousness into that brain and maybe implant it to someone else. Or Shen Wulong was talking about specifically the chances of a cyber brain being implanted into another human being and that actually working. Shen Wulong actually says the chances of that are incredibly low, and so that's one of the reasons why the cyber brain isn't really going to be a viable option for him right now. And this is kind of like a similar reason to why he actually also abandoned mind uploading, because it doesn't actually upload consciousness as well. So it seems like, yes, as I've said before, Shen Wulong wants to be in the fight against Tiger himself. That's his goal. And so that actually leaves him with one option: cutting his own brain in half to do a brain transplant, basically. This actually leaves him with one option, and that is cutting his own brain in half to do a brain transplantation. And so because of this, this only really leaves him with one option, and that is brain implantation with his own actual brain, giving one half to Ryuki and the other half, or the Tiger Connector's half of the brain, to Oma. That's what this really amounts to. Now, the revelation of this plan is pretty interesting, because I do wonder what Lohan will actually do once he discovers that this was the plan. Would he just wait for the connector to die or something? Or does Lohan just want his memories no matter what? Because Yamashita does talk about the danger of this process, because he has an almost disgusted and fear type of look in his face when he hears this idea and calls Shen Wulong insane, like completely insane, which is quite interesting, and notes to the fact that any one of those plans are not even possible within the current medical sphere right now. So it's impossible no matter which direction you go. And of course, Shen Wulong somewhat agrees with this, which is why he was going to basically teach Ryuki and Oma the yogi breathing technique to slow down their aging, so that at least they make it till the time in which it is possible. And so it seems as though Shen Wulong has sort of thought of that idea, of course, and that is his answer. Basically extend their lives or just make other clones. It's really that simple. But Yamashita is seeing something quite disturbing in Shen Wulong here. And this is something I did want to talk about at some point, so I'm glad I got the opportunity here. The morality of Shen Wulong is questionable at best, mainly because of the cloning project that he has going. Something that even his own friend was like, nah dog, this isn't right. And one of those reasons actually is that, well, despite the fact that, of course, Oma and Ryuki are somewhat successes for him, what happens to the countless failure clones? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Most of them would probably die from birth, basically, since most clones end up dying, which was confirmed by Mokaku. So you have potentially babies being killed here because of this practice. And then there's the whole Lohan situation, which Lohan has to have a reason as to why he does not like Shen Wulong and actually just straight up calls him a monster, which turns out to be at least somewhat right. It is kind of funny how Shen Wulong is pointing the finger at Lohan and saying Lohan is the monster, and Lohan is also pointing at Shen Wulong and saying, he's the monster really? And it just so turns out that both of them are actually right here. Both of them are monsters. But of course, Yamashita is just noting to the fact that he seems to not have any regard for human life here. Despite the fact that he actually talks like a human being, he acts like a human being, he's missing what could be described as love for other human beings, or at least empathy for other human beings, or even his own clones here. And Yamashita just ends up asking him the question, hey look, let's say this plan is a success, what happens to Oma and Ryuki? And it is at this point in which Shen Wulong actually starts to think about it and says, oh yeah, they'll just die. And the way it's framed is that this is probably one of the first times that Shen Wulong is actually thinking about this. Again, what I said earlier with his lack of empathy for other human beings or himself. If he's been doing this for so long and is only thinking about the consequences now, that is truly concerning. And of course, Yamashita being Yamashita and considering Oma and Ryuki are people he cares about deeply, does actually just call out Shen Wulong here and says he's heartless for actually doing that, and questions why Shen Wulong even has the right to take away their lives. And hearing this, Shen Wulong does something quite interesting. He just says, alright, fine. Since he hadn't thought of it that way, he will scrap the entire plan if he agrees to this one condition. But before we actually end up hearing what that condition is, we transition over to the aftermath of the fight between Ryan, William, and Sean, and it seems as though the Westwood faction has a cleanup team, more fodder tier dudes that are basically taking the corpses of at least William and Sean. Now, in my last review, I did say William is probably dead, but here the cleanup crew is actually collecting someone, and it seems like it's just one person. We only see one person that's covered, and we don't know exactly who it is. Now, I think William is probably dead, but hey, there's at least a sign that William could actually survive all of this, since we only see one body. But that aside, we get to see Gilbert again, and Gilbert is looking pretty jacked, and he actually seems to be rocking the Edward look. Like, he's looking more and more like Edward at this point. And one of the fodder soldiers actually comes up and he says that he's even surprised that they got William, again alluding to the fact that William might be dead, despite the fact that he had superhuman syndrome and everything. And actually brings into question how Ryan would be able to actually cut William when he was that physically tough. And Gilbert actually knows the answer to this. Otekamaru. And funny enough, completes what Kure Uryu would have actually said, or Uryo would have actually said. Because remember, when Otekamaru was introduced as a blade that he could find in the mountain, I think the mountain was called Fuji something, he said that after mastering the sword, Ryan would become something. And Gilbert confirms that that something is the Devil King. So now, Kure Ryan has basically graduated from being called the Devil to being called the Devil King. Which is all hype and all until you realize that Gilbert is now the god of the underworld. So I'm assuming now Gilbert has actually trained up and has gotten stronger since the last time we saw him a few chapters ago. That's my guess. Because that is the epithet in which he is going by right now. And says that this message to him is actually a direct challenge to him as the god of the underworld. And so he orders his goons to straight up go find Ryan and knows the fact that he's probably still alive. Because remember, that was still in question. But once that is over, we actually transition back to the whole Connector and Joji and Yamashita situation, with Shen Wulong seemingly taking Joji back because Joji's basically too wasted to go by himself. With Yamashita noting to the fact that he's probably agreed to Shen Wulong's condition. But what would actually be this condition that the Connector made an agreement to? What we do know about it is that Yamashita said if he actually fulfills this condition, he will actually save both Oma and Ryuki. And if you've made it this far, don't forget to like and sub for more of this type of reviews. But here's my thoughts on what this condition is. It has to line up for the most part with Shen Wulong's agenda. And Shen Wulong's agenda from the beginning is to fight an equal. The Tiger Connector just so happens to be one of those equals. And so I think the agreement is quite simple. If Yamashita can find an equal to basically Shen Wulong, then he will more than likely just stop the plan, since he already has an equal to fight. I really think it is that simple. But we'll get to see later on as the chapters go by what this agreement was and how it will ultimately impact the story, whether or not it will lead to actually Oma and Ryuki surviving. But yeah, until next time, take it easy.